At Fide.email, we believe in protecting your privacy and supporting your faith. Fide.email offers peace of mind with features like end-to-end encryption and secure communications tools. Your data stays private and your values remain intact. Choose an email provider that understands what matters to you. Make the switch to Fide.email today. Let's start today with the usual thing we've been starting with lately, which are the updates on Francis's health. He had another downturn yesterday. I'm not sure how to read it. From my reading, it looks like that it's one of those things that once they take care of it, he'll bounce back from immediately again, but we shall see. Let's start with this morning's update from Michael Haynes, LifeSite News reporter. It says, following yesterday's 2 episodes of respiratory failure, Vatican says that Pope Francis slept all night and now continues to rest. Just a general reminder, by the way, folks, that they give you a more detailed update right around the lunch hour in the United States. So keep in mind, if you're wanting to find that without waiting till the next day, you're going to have to go to X. It seems to be the place where you're going to find it the fastest. But here's a Catholic Sat who is based out of Europe somewhere, monitors everything going on in Rome. This is yesterday's update. Not great news, to put it mildly. The latest on Pope Francis from the Vatican, and the news is not good. The Holy Father suffered 2 episodes of acute respiratory failure, requiring 2 bronchoscopies, and is on mechanical ventilation. Let us pray for the Holy Father. Now, mechanical ventilation, the way they describe it, it's a mask, not tubes down into his lungs. It's a mask he's wearing. Today, the Holy Father presented 2 episodes of acute respiratory failure caused by significant accumulation of endobronchial mucus and consequent bronchospasm, which means he had a buildup of some sort of mucus that was causing him to have a hard time breathing. 2 bronchoscopies were therefore performed with the need for aspiration of abundant secretions, meaning aspiration, removal of excess stuff. In the afternoon, non-invasive mechanical ventilation was resumed. Non-invasive means he was wearing a breathing mask of some kind. He remained alert, oriented, and cooperative throughout. The prognosis remains guarded as usual. They won't tell us what's going on. There are people starting to point that out. Rich Rejo, who for a high school teacher and someone who absolutely adores Francis, has all the best information, it seems like. He gives us this addendum later in the day. According to Vatican sources, the accumulation of mucus is a consequence of bilateral pneumonia and is part of the course of the disease. So for those wondering, and I tend to think he's being accurate. The America First Post put this up. This is an organization I take with a grain of salt because sometimes I've caught them being wrong about things. It says, while hospitalized, Pope Francis praised God for his illness, calling it a blessing that he has deepened his faith in him and allowed him to share in the sufferings of others. I feel in my heart the blessing that is hidden within frailty, because it is precisely in these moments that we learn even more to trust in the Lord. At the same time, I thank God for giving me the opportunity to share in body and spirit the condition of so many sick and suffering people. And, that's a pretty good attitude to have. He's also put out some declarations recently that are extremely questionable, that are completely make it look like he hasn't really learned much of anything from his ordeal that he's going through. Now, there's your update on Pope Francis. Now, do you remember the story of Father Marko Rupnik? This was the Jesuit priest. It's always Jesuits, it seems these days, who's responsible for some of the really creepy art you see in parishes and basilicas all around the world. His material is in Padre Pio's shrine. His material is in the Fatima shrine at Lourdes, at the Knights of Columbus's headquarters in the United States. I mean, it's random parishes, and it's the big, blank, soulless, large-eyed, almost look like the visitors with UAPs, those creatures, those alien things. They almost look like that. There's a lot of weird symbolism there that people have pointed out. Well, if you remember, it was discovered that he has been violating his vows of chastity and celibacy, that he has been engaging in activities suitable to the married state with nuns that he coerced. And the activities he was engaging in weren't exactly suited to the married state, to put it mildly. He was having them engage in all sorts of depraved behavior with him, coercing them, and invoking the most heinous blasphemy imaginable and sacrilege, because he was using implements for celebrating the Mass in those activities with them. Things that I could not give you more detail about if I wanted to, not just because our hosts on this platform would immediately remove me from the platform for getting explicit? Well, because I can literally not bring the words out of my mouth to say what he was doing. It was that grotesque. We found out about this like 2 years ago, and the investigation has been slow, to say the least. Almost as if somebody in Rome is protecting the Jesuit priest. He was kicked out of the Jesuit order for these deeds. He was too much for the Jesuits. Just to let that one marinate in your mind for a second. He was automatically excommunicated from the priesthood for his activities. Francis lifted the excommunication and put him back into pastoral ministry. He never went back to his home country, even though he was supposed to, and he's been continuing his work in Rome with the art institute that he works in. And succumbing to the pressure, Rome said, we're going to do an investigation. Well, they keep giving us, there aren't really much things to update you on for this. So somebody did some digging. It turns out, Father Marko Rupnik, the man with a disordered taste for nuns, is living in a convent with his followers, and yes, there are nuns on site. I'm not making that up. I am sometimes reminded that while I try in charity to limit my imagination for how bad of decisions that can come out of Rome are, I am sometimes reminded that they can exceed my worst expectations. So the headline from Info Vaticana, which is not a radical outlet at all, Rupnik and his followers occupy a convent near Rome with the support of Cardinal de Donatis. We'll talk about him in a second. There's the convent, and there are some mixed reports online saying the nuns aren't there. They are still there. They're still there. The Vatican is rushing to tell you, well, they're packing their bags and leaving. Well, that's great. Probably a good idea if you're going to put him in a convent, but why did you put him in a convent with nuns on the premises? My apologies for these pop-ups on their website. I can't do anything about it. The mechanisms you can use to block that kind of thing, our hosts on this platform take such a dim view on, it puts my channel at risk using it, so I can't. But here's what they have to say about all this. The convent, located on a hill surrounded by high walls and woods, has been for years a place frequented by members of the Aleti Center for the Organization of Spiritual Exercises. That's Father Rupnik's organization. However, recently the community has been occupied by Rupnik and other expelled Jesuits from the Society of Jesus, generating uncertainty and alarm among the Benedictine nuns of Priscilla, who have gradually been displaced from the place. They've been quietly leaving. On February 27th, La Nuova Bussola Quotidiana, and we'll be using their English website version in just a moment, attempted to visit the convent but received an evasive response. The nuns have left. There is no one, a female voice said over the intercom. However, shortly afterwards, a vehicle left the premises and another man identified himself as a priest, Don Milan Zust, Rupnik's former superior in the Jesuit community of the Aleti Center. When asked about the situation at the convent, the priest was evasive, arguing that the nuns were in the process of moving and that the place was being renovated. So, Rupnik is there, and there are nuns still there. Remember what Rupnik did. He's living in a place with nuns. Cardinal de Donatis, the former Vicar General of Rome and now major penitentiary, has played a key role in this controversial relocation. The Cardinal was reported to have built a luxurious apartment in the convent, while in the nearby village, thanks guys, while in the nearby village of Poggio Catino, he owns a country house with a swimming pool where he allegedly hosted Rupnik and his circle before moving them to Montefiglio. Despite the seriousness of the allegations surrounding Rupnik, De Donatis has been one of his main protectors, publicly downplaying the allegations against him. I don't know why the translation here keeps saying her instead of him, but and facilitating his reintegration into religious life. Testimonies collected by the other outlet indicate that the significant modifications are being made to the convent church without the corresponding permits, altering the original structure protected by cultural heritage. The convent is a heritage site, which means there are a mountain of laws and legal regulations you have to go through to be able to change anything about the place, if they'll let you do it to begin with. They've raised a wall at the altar and are covering the church with new paintings, says an informant. Yeah, congratulations. The Vatican has learned nothing from the Rupnik story. They have placed him in the same building as nuns. Yeah, the nuns are leaving. Apparently, some of them have been in the process of leaving as soon as he arrived. Probably because they realized who they were housing and could not stand to be in the same building with him for their own safety. Rationalist Catholic says, colony of the expelled. Weird how that works out, isn't it? Some initial reports made it sound like they found an abandoned convent, because there are plenty of those in Italy, because in the post-Vatican II era, this springtime of the new advent of the church has seen a total collapse in religious vocations. And so there are plenty of convents, unfortunately, that are just empty. And if they had placed him there in an empty, verified empty convent, where the only other person besides he and other men like him may have been a groundskeeper, preferably an adult male in good health, nobody would care. This wouldn't be a story worth reporting on, except maybe, hey, the Vatican did something right. They kept this guy away from everybody else. But that's not what's happening here. They put him in a convent with nuns. We go to the New Daily Compass, which is the English language name of that outlet. They give you this headline: Rupnik and his companions occupy convent near Rome. Cardinal de Donatis is director. The convent is the Montefiglio in Sabina. And yeah, the Pope's former personal priest is making a luxurious apartment there. Again, you can't make this up. At a time when the Vatican is broke financially, to the point where they're relying on China for money, the U.S. government has cut off all the funds to the various nonprofits that help give money to Rome. You'd think they wouldn't spend money on this, but they do. How important is Rupnik to the order of things in Rome? How deeply has that man wormed his way into the power structure of the Vatican in Rome, that not only is he restored to active duty despite using the confessional to absolve the sins of those he coerced into committing sins with him, which earns a priest automatic excommunication, unequivocally, and all the other things he did. How deeply into that is he embedded? Or maybe a better question, what does he know? What does he know? What things does he know about who exactly? Because under normal circumstances, somebody like this, they would have he'd already by now be in a jail cell for the things he did. And I was reminded by somebody who asked me yesterday, hey, doesn't the Vatican have dungeons? Yes, they do. You'd think they'd, modernize them to keep them up to the barest minimum requirement of European law. But beyond that, you would be a fitting place to put somebody like Father Marko Rupnik. But no, instead, he's in a convent with men like him. They're building luxury apartments here. You're going to hear a repeat of some of this, but this is worth hearing. It's from the article, quote, "The nuns have gone out. There's nobody here at the moment. I'm just passing through and can't let you in," answers a woman's voice on the intercom. "But can't we just visit the church and the grounds? We've heard it's beautiful," we ask. "No, there's no one here, but we know there are priests," they reply. Silence. The conversation abruptly ends. It's Thursday, the 27th of February. We're standing outside the large metal gate of the convent of the Benedictine Sisters of Priscilla and Montefiglio in the municipality of Casperia, a small village in the Sabina Hills in the province of Rieti. We came here because we had been told that Father Marko Ivan Rupnik, the former Jesuit expelled from the order and accused of serious offenses of sins against the flesh of women and nuns, has been residing here for several weeks. Not only that, but he is together with other former Jesuits from the Aleti Center, once the headquarters of Rupnik and his followers until the scandal broke. Montefiglio is just a hilltop, and the only building is the ancient, majestic convent, which originally belonged to the Capuchin friars. It was bought and restored in 1935 by Monsignor Gioli Belvedere. Then the secretary of the Pontifical Institute of Christian Archaeology opened the monastery to a group of women who wished to lead a religious life, and who in 1936 founded the Benedictine Oblates of Regular of Priscilla, later to join the Benedictine congregation. But now, shrouded in a mysterious conspiracy, it is passing into the hands of the small group of former Jesuits, favored by its location. In fact, surrounded by a high wall and a wood, which separates it from the main road, it is a perfect residence for those who wish to live in secrecy. Rejected by the woman's voice who says she is just passing through, we decide to persist and linger at the entrance for a while. Surprisingly, only a few minutes later, the gate opens to allow a lone man in a car to drive out where there is nobody. He stopped. We asked him for some information, and obviously he doesn't know anything either. But a little later, seeing the gate hasn't closed, another man appears and walks towards us. This time he introduces himself. "I'm a priest. My name is Milan." Milan Zust, who for years had been Father Rupnik's superior in the Jesuit community of the Aleti Center from 2018 to 2021, collaborator, the delegate of the Superior General for the Interprovincial Houses and works in Rome, Father Johann Verschuren, who sent Rupnik on a tour of the houses and interprovincial works in Rome. despite the fact that he had already been hit by the famous lightning excommunication, and despite the rumors of other evil deeds that really were already known, hence confirming what an informer had told us. Of course, we pretended to be tourists, interested in the church and the convent, but Father Milan remained suspicious and evasive when asked more precise questions. He said that he had been there for 2 weeks, that we couldn't go in because the convent was being renovated, because the nuns were moving out and the future of the convent had not been decided. It's true the few remaining nuns are packing their bags to move to their house in San Felice Churchill, and according to some sources, the convent will remain in the hands of this small group of former nuns, or former Jesuits rather, who have by now invaded the nuns' area, eating with them in their refectory and laying down the law. All right, so they're not just keeping the nuns separate from the Jesuits; they're sharing meals together. Can you imagine that you have a person in your midst, notorious for doing unspeakably evil things to nuns, things that make the angels weep, things that earn you automatic excommunication, things that involve sacrilege of the sacraments and sacrilege of the altar and holy implements. And you're expected to share meals with this person and with other people they saw fit to put in there with him. I've said this before. I'll say it again. It's clear that somebody in Rome hates nuns. They hate women religious. We know this through their actions, through their crushing of religious houses. They're helping dioceses seize property to pay off loans and to passing of essentially canonical changes that make it easy to crush traditional nuns. The more conservative and the more traditional leaning the nuns are, meaning the more they look like nuns, the more they live like nuns, the more they spend their times in prayer, especially contemplative nuns, the more Rome seems to hate them. And here they have put a monster in the midst of them and forced them to share meals together. Let's talk about Father or Cardinal De Donatis. He is the one who has orchestrated all of this. What you're about to hear was an announcement made once the news of this started circulating in Europe. This announcement happened after it was already known his role in putting a wicked, wicked priest in with nuns. Headline from Vatican News. Cardinal De Donatis will preside Ash Wednesday liturgy on Aventine Hill. As Pope Francis recovers from bilateral pneumonia at Rome's Gemelli Hospital, the major penitentiary of Apostolic Penitentiary, Cardinal Angelo De Donatis, will preside at the traditional celebration of the Ash Wednesday liturgy on the Aventine Hill. This is a liturgy Francis was supposed to be running himself. The Cardinal is given a high-profile liturgical celebration, normally that Francis would either preside over or at least be would be on paper presiding over, even if in the last few years somebody else was doing all the celebration for him. And now this is being given to Cardinal De Donatis. Now, I don't know how papabile he is. His name has never come up as somebody you're likely to see as Pope Francis II or something. But this looks suspiciously to me like a reward. The Holy See Press Office announced on Friday that Cardinal Angelo De Donatis, major penitentiary of the Apostolic Penitentiary, will preside at the traditional celebration of Ash Wednesday liturgy on the Aventine Hill, which will take place tomorrow, March 5th. Maintaining an ancient Roman tradition revived by John the 23rd, the Pope usually begins the Ash Wednesday stational liturgy at the Church of Sant Anselmo before leading a penitential procession to the Basilica of Saint Sabina on the Aventine Hill, where he celebrates Mass. Since Pope Francis is in Rome's Gemelli Hospital to receive treatment for bilateral pneumonia, he has delegated the Cardinal to preside in this place for this year's ceremony. Again, personally done by Pope Francis. Job well done, Cardinal. And so again, this is why I ask, what does Rupnik know about who exactly? Or is this just a disorder that we see in Rome where, because it's been reported for decades at this point that the Jesuits run virtually everything in the Roman Curia. It's why nothing was done when you had better popes, more Orthodox popes, the hermeneutic of continuity popes, John Paul II and Ratzinger. Why, even under them, they said a lot of good things, but they didn't do anything about the men like Rupnik and McCarrick and them, even though it was known that everybody knew that what they tried to do was never really enforced. It was, as Pope Benedict told an American or a Canadian who asked him, look, Holy Father, we know about all these evil priests doing evil, unspeakable things. We've written to you to ask, did you get our letters? And he said, no, I never received them. There are people who open my mail before I get to it. Is that the reason that Rupnik was protected? I'm very curious what you think about that. So let me know in the comments. Or do you think that this was just a case of the Jesuits doing Jesuit things? Do you think this was Francis who put them there? Again, we don't even know how long Rupnik was there for. But they found out February 27th. All of this points to one of the many reasons people leave the church. Because they see these monsters being treated with kid gloves. Looming over all of this is another story. And that's the migration story. Francis has said a lot recently. I'll probably talk about that in the next couple of days about this. And looming over that is the USAID story, Catholic Charities, and all the rest. An interesting story broke in the European press about the church in America, and it touches on that migration story that is, or was, dominating the church news. And certainly that story will be back. I guarantee you that story will be back. There's no way that's going away, even if Francis's health issues have done a masterful job of sweeping that away from the public discourse. The U.S. bishops make a number of contentious claims that by welcoming these illicit migrants to the U.S., we are living the gospel message about welcoming the visitor and all the rest. And moreover, we're making America more Catholic by bringing in people who are Catholics. They've said this. I've heard them say it myself. But it's not actually true, nor is it living the gospel message anyway for a number of reasons, though we are to be sure to help migrants in need and the rest. But one reason that all the stuff they're saying, their excuses for this, are not true is that the church has done a terrible job of keeping Catholics in Central and South America from joining heretical, schismatic, pseudo-Christian groups like the Pentecostals or Presbyterian groups. Moreover, we know that when they do come to the U.S. and start to live in this increasingly godless country that the bishops don't really do much to try to stem the tide of, they're twiddling their thumbs and saying a couple of things of how sad it is that people don't go to church anymore, but they don't really do anything about it. These migrants then leave the faith if they had had it when they first arrived, often joining those heretical schismatic groups or just becoming secularists and atheists. And now we have data to back this up. A couple days ago, I told you about a new report from Pew Research about religiosity in America. Go to Info Catholica for this headline. Catholicism loses ground among Hispanics in the United States, under their faith in crisis section. It's really sad that a Catholic news outlet has to have this. What's even more sad is this is the only place I have found this article. Didn't see it on any American Catholic news sites. Didn't see this on any Canadian Catholic news sites. Didn't see this on any English-speaking Catholic news sites. I found this in Info Catholica, which is, I believe, in Spain. Again, apologies for any syntax issues here. We are using a translation extension on Google Chrome to make this thing readable. But as many of us have pointed out just anecdotally, we see that they arrive, they get acclimated a little bit to the environment, and then they leave Catholicism for some heretical schismatic group or just secularism in general. And an argument to make with the bishops about why they need to actually embrace everything the new administration is doing is that it's better for the salvation of the souls of the people they're trying to bring in here in the first place that they're not permitted in. Because if they are permitted in, they're more likely to leave the faith and their soul will be lost. From the article, quote, a recent study on religion in the United States shows that while the percentage of white, black, and Asian adults who identify as Catholic has remained relatively stable since 2007, the percentage of Hispanic adults who identify as Catholic has decreased dramatically. The Pew Research Center's 2023-24 Religious Landscape Study found that between 2007 and 2023-24, the percentage of white adults in the United States who identify as Catholic has fallen from 22 to 17%, the percentage of black adults from 5% to 4%, and the percentage of Asian adults from 17 to 14%. Meanwhile, the percentage of Hispanic adults who identify as Catholic has fallen from 58 to 42%. The percentage of Catholics in the U.S. Hispanic population has been declining rapidly for a long time, said Gregory A. Smith, Senior Associate Director of Research at Pew, who has led studies on religion and American life. There was a time when we first did the religious landscape study when we could say that we were partners headed toward a future where the Catholic population in the United States would be majority Hispanic, even though most Hispanics in the country would not be Catholic. But we are not at the point now where most Catholics are Hispanic. We are at the point where most Hispanics are not Catholic. And we have been there for some time now, he told Crux. Crux is an American news outlet talking about the Pew Research Survey, but they're not widely read in America because they are a bishop's outlet out of Boston. Think about that for a moment. They're they're more in a more official America magazine, basically. And as a consequence of that, they're not read nearly as widely as America magazine. For context, 36% of Catholics in the United States are Hispanic. It's not surprising to see those numbers. Hoffman Ospino, professor of Hispanic ministry and religious education at Boston College, told Crux, the larger the Hispanic population is, the larger the portion that is born and raised in the United States, the more decline we will continue to see. He explained that we are no longer in the 1990s, when more than half of the Hispanic population in the United States were immigrants, who were likely to be religious. According to Pew study, 58% of immigrants in the United States are Christians. Today, about 64% of Hispanics were born and raised in the United States. He said he expects that number to continue to grow, meaning more Hispanics will be born into a pluralistic, secularized culture and therefore will not be Catholic. End quote. We have the data. They leave the church. Why do you think that is? It's the same reason that everybody else leaves the church. They leave because the church in America, specifically the bishops and many of their priests, don't preach the gospel. They preach the new synodal religion. They preach group hugs and kumbaya and inclusivity and recycling and being nice to people. But they don't preach the gospel. But all this gets worse. You see, those who want to stay Catholic leave because the church in America isn't doing anything to keep them in the church. It should sound familiar to you. It's the experience of Catholics of all demographic groups in America. They leave, again, I'm going to repeat myself here, they leave because the U.S. bishops and their priests are preoccupied with other things besides the gospel. So they leave. They leave to join heretical, schismatic groups that up until 40 years ago wouldn't have even been considered Christian by serious Christians. That is what they do. Back to the article here. Wrong one. Go back to the article from Info Catholica. More details. Another factor, according to Ospino, is the responsibility of the church itself. He noted that Hispanics are turning away from the faith in the U.S. in large part because, quote, much of our pastoral outreach is inadequate, meaning the second generation, those born in the country, are left unserved. Most of the efforts in Hispanic ministry in the United States are directed at the immigrant population, masses in Spanish, sacraments in Spanish, social services for the immigrant community. All that is very important and very necessary. However, we have not found a way to accompany those 2/3 of Latinos who were born and raised in the United States. Many pastoral leaders assume that they will live their faith like their immigrant parents, grandparents, or siblings, or that become Americanized to simply integrate into the white English-speaking Catholic community. The truth is that neither of those things are happening. We need better ways to reach out to this community. To make progress in this area, he said the church needs to focus at the local level, with parishes providing better support to young people and families. At the national level, he noted that fewer, quote, global pastoral plans are needed and more plans that strengthen local efforts such as apostolic movements, parishes, catechesis, and family ministry, end quote. Boy, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? It's the same problem everybody's facing. You know what would actually help keep people? If you reminded the young men, because women tend to leave the faith less than men do. If you reminded young men that the most masculine thing you can possibly do in life is to submit to Jesus Christ, submit to the teachings of his church, and not embrace the values of the world that tell you that masculinity is a bad thing. That's what you would do. Right ordered masculinity. And then have, from the AMBO, your priest and your bishops teach the faith, including the 4 last things, the consequences of sin, why you should not get too wrapped up in the broader culture. All those things that are actually part of the faith, instead of this new false gospel of inclusivity and all the rest of this nonsense. But they won't do that. They're allergic to it. They preach a false gospel. Many of them do, out of fear of losing Caesar's dirty money, out of fear of offending people. The gospel is offensive to many people. And Our forebears in the Counter-Reformation knew that. That didn't stop them. Our forebears among the Jesuits in the 18th century, in the 17th century, knew that. When they came to North America, they knew that the locals would not like what they heard in many cases, and that they would pay a very steep price for preaching the gospel. But they did it anyway because they cared about their souls. They cared about their final destination. They cared about their salvation. Many of them recognized that their own salvation was linked to the salvation of the souls of others, and that fueled their ministry. Why don't our bishops today make that same realization? Thank you, Damian Keller, for the super chat. He says, there are South American Catholic communists. Yeah, they are. Full of fruit of liberation theology, Francis supports their movement. And that also drives people out of the faith. It absolutely does. There is no question that that leads people away from Catholicism and Christianity more broadly. I've seen some well-known young Protestants out there pointing out on social media with enormous audiences blaming the Catholic Church for this woke ideology, because the Catholic Church, they say, embraced it through liberation theology, and it's hard to argue against. Now, the Catholic Church didn't actually embrace liberation theology. The Catholic Church just did a very bad job of combating it. What should have happened was, when this stuff started emerging in the 50s and the 60s, was an unequivocal condemnation of it with excommunication. That didn't really happen. Instead, they started trying to meet them halfway. That's why Catholic social teaching after Vatican II was broken. It's because they tried to meet them halfway with it. I'm curious, what do people believe? What do people think about this in the comments? Are you that surprised to see the new arrivals come in, many of them Catholic, and then they leave, or the kids leave? I would posit that it's actually the parish environment, and it's actually the sort of Tower of Babel in reverse that we've seen, where instead of everybody unified in the city of God under the liturgical language of Latin in the West through the traditional forms of the Mass, instead now we've essentially separated people into their own language groups, making it so they have no connection to other Catholics other than based on ethnicity. That's one part of it. It's absolutely part of it. The Cathos and Theos was one prior to the schism. Modern Christians, after Luther, Bible quarters missed the wisdom and grace of the Bible. I mean, a lot of Protestants have never read the Bible fully. And that's obvious when you argue with them. They've read like 40, 50 verses, and then they memorize them to try to gotcha on people. But it's clear that sola scriptura is on its face nonsensical. All right, folks. Miriam, thanks very much for the question. How's your family doing? Praying for them. We're fine. We're just having a stormy night here. So, it turned out to be nothing, thankfully. All right, folks. I'm just curious what you have to say about all this in the comments, please. It does not surprise me that one bit that we see with all this happening, people leave the church. It doesn't really surprise me that when you see the church publicly taking the wrong side on this issue, and that you see the culture itself, which is increasingly atheistic, godless, having this effect on people. It doesn't surprise me, but I'm curious what you have to say. So let me know in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. Sharing this on social media helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.